Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the La Pêche Coalition for Green New Deal's World Water Day celebration. My name is Emma Louis, and I am a member of the coalition as well as Cooperative Bibliothèque. Most of the coalition members live in La Pêche, some in surrounding areas, which is on the unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. And I'll be your moderator for today's event, but I just want to introduce a couple of folks that are helping out. So we have Rita, who is helping with tech, and she is the president of Friends of the Gatineau River, or FOG. And FOG's mission is to inspire the community to work together to protect and improve the Gatineau River for future generations, monitoring, advocating, educating, and celebrating. And we also have Miriam, who is going to be doing the simultaneous translation in French. And I also just want to say thanks to them, and then also the other members of the coalition who have helped organize this event. It's been such a joy to work with this group. We have a great lineup of speakers, but before we start with them, we just want to say something about the translation. And we just want to figure out who here is needing French translation, who's okay in English, or can do both. So Rita's just going to do a poll. So if you can just put your answer in the poll, then we'll give instructions on how to get the French translation. So if you could just enter your answers now. Okay, Rita, do we have all the answers, or most of them?
We're waiting for a few. 85% of the people have voted.
Okay, great. So if you haven't voted, if you could just check off which applies to you for language preference.
Okay, well, here we go. So I'll just, it's 90%, but I'll just share the results.
Okay, great. Okay, so for English speakers, you just stay in this channel, and then for French speakers, you can, at the bottom of your screen, you should have an interpretation button, and if you just click on that and click French, and maybe Rita, if you want to translate that for French speakers.
Oui, pour ceux qui veulent entendre, on a une traduction française qui se passe simultanément. Alors, vous pouvez aller sur le panneau en bas et vous pouvez choisir le canal français. Vous allez entendre Myriam traduire tout ce qui se passe dans le webinaire.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll start. So I'll just talk a little bit about the La Pêche Coalition for a Green New Deal. We are a grassroots group, and we advocate for rapid, just, and transformative change based on scientific and Indigenous knowledge and the Green New Deal for Canada paradigm. We advocate, educate, connect, and mobilize in our community and beyond. So we thank you so much for joining today, and here it's a beautiful day, so appreciate folks who are in this area and taking the time to out of this beautiful day to join us to celebrate water. And we just invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, so you can include your name, pronouns, the group you're with, if any, and where you're living, including the Indigenous traditional territory. So I'll write that in the chat as well. So our event today is to celebrate water and to learn about Maude Barlow's latest book, which is Whose Water Is It Anyway? Taking Water Protection into Public Hands. Lakes, rivers, and groundwater are integral parts of ecosystems that provide drinking water, regulate the climate, and sustain wildlife. We see a broad range of threats to clean water in Canada, including bottled water takings, the drinking water advisories in First Nations, pipelines, mines, privatization, the climate crisis, and more. And the pandemic has put a bigger spotlight on the need for clean water. We see how clearly water and climate are deeply interconnected. For example, in La Pêche declared a state of emergency in October 2017 from flooding, and drought has been a marked feature in recent summers, with some residents' wells going dry. And we see this happening in communities from coast to coast. So protecting water is critical, and it's all of our responsibility to do so. Maude will talk about the communities she's worked with, who have done amazing and inspiring work to protect water for current and future generations. She'll be focusing on the Blue Communities Project, which focuses on the human rights to water and sanitation, banning bottled water, promoting public water and wastewater services, and opposing the privatization of water. I was the National Water Campaigner for the Council of Canadians for 9 years, where I worked with Maude and worked a lot with the Council's chapters and other communities on this project, and their work has just been really inspiring. There's two amazing local water stewards who are based in Wakefield who will also be speaking today, and that's Elizabeth Logue, who is Ottawa's Riverkeeper, and Ilsa Torrensen, who is also a member of the La Pêche Coalition for a Green New Deal. We also have Rebecca Pétrin from Au Secours, which is an organization based in Quebec, and they've just done an incredible amount of work on Blue communities. So after the panelists speak, we'll have time for questions and answers, and you'll be able to type the questions using the Q&A option. So you should see that on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You just see a little bubble that says Q&A. So today's event is a part of the La Pêche Coalition for a Green New Deal's education series. So we've been hosting a regular education series on food and climate and water and a number of different topics. And so we're also accepting donations to support this event plus some upcoming events. So you can make a donation through PayPal, and I'll include the link in the chat. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Elizabeth Logue. As Riverkeeper, Elizabeth, who is Algonquin and Irish, works as a strong advocate for a healthy watershed for generations to come, as well as providing a voice for its entire ecosystem. Elizabeth has close to 20 years experience with the federal government and her community, working on partnerships and community development, which brings together federal, provincial, and Indigenous collaborators towards common goals linked to sustainable development. Her favorite water activities are canoeing, swimming, and collecting rocks along the shores of the Dino-Zibi, and Elizabeth can correct me on saying that properly, which is the Gatineau River, and also McGregor Lake in Val-des-Monts, as well as other rivers, lakes, and streams. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
Miigwech, thank you. And as Emma started this session acknowledging the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, I was always taught by my elders to actually welcome people to the territory. And so I welcome everyone here today, wherever you are, what territory you're on. As Emma said, I am presently close to the banks of the Tanaga-Dino-Zibi, the Gatineau River. And I will talk a little bit today about the Ottawa Riverkeeper work that we're doing. I just wanted to also start with, I did this morning go down to the river and make a tobacco offering to start the day. And I was down there and I took out the tobacco and I was thinking and trying to give the positive energy to the river. And a local came up behind me and startled me a little bit. But he came to offer me maple syrup that he had just made. So I thought it manifested that it was water day. I was making an offering, and then here he came with Colin Dolan came with a can of maple syrup that he works with the company, and he offered that. So it was wonderful start to this day of especially equinox that we're all here together. So chimigwich for that. And I'm going to share my screen, I believe, and just talk a little bit about the Ottawa Riverkeeper work. Can everyone see that? Nodding? Yes?
I don't see it yet.
It's blank.
Okay.
Like it comes up, but it's blank. It's white.
Oh. Well, I will speak. I have an elder that's always taught when we do a presentation, he always says the first rule of presentations is to, you know, speak loud to be heard, stand tall to be seen, and sit down quickly to be appreciated. So keep your story straight. I'll just talk a little bit, and I may not have any visuals, so we'll just go with that. But I can make the presentation available through Emma and Rita and everyone. But so Ottawa Riverkeeper organization is a non-governmental organization. It's been around for 20 years. This year will be the 20th anniversary of Ottawa Riverkeeper. And we are a member of the Waterkeeper Alliance, which is an international alliance of waterkeepers, riverkeepers across the world. There are 300 waterkeepers across internationally. And so Ottawa Riverkeeper has been around for 20 years, as I mentioned, and we work, you know, on the Ottawa River watershed. And so that does include the Tanagadino-Zibu. It does include the Gatineau River up here, where a lot of you are, I think, listening in from today. And so our new vision statement that we've been working on, which gets away from this swim, drink, fish, which I find is very human-centered, is that we inspire cooperative action for a healthy watershed for all generations and all species. So what that means is that we do work on, we're a science-based organization, but we do try to work on inspiring water protection on all levels. So the ecological level, as well as the social and you know, economic level. So we are trying to inspire that cooperative action for a healthy watershed in different ways. So we are an NGO, and I just wanted to mention how large the Ottawa River watershed is, because I think a lot of people don't realize that. It's almost 1,300 kilometers, and it goes from just south of Val-d'Or to the east, and up around Temiskaming, and then back down and out towards Oka near Montreal. So it is quite an expansive watershed. It's the 8th largest watershed in North America. Oh, look at this. There it is.
Sorry, Elizabeth, I was able to download your file, and so now I have the slides. You just tell me when you want me to switch screen.
Okay, it's sort of, I find it's funny when we do these online, because it's like, it's a mix of old school and new technology. It's, you've got someone clicking, even though you're miles apart. Yeah, so here is a map of the watershed. It spans, it's quite a complex watershed in that you have 11 Algonquin nations within the watershed. You have 2 provinces, Quebec and Ontario, and then federal jurisdiction as well. And in fact, just recently, after the floods that affected the Ottawa River, especially back in 2018-19, that when the Ontario government did a study of the flooding, they brought in an expert, Doug McNeil was his name, and he worked on a lot of the flood issues out in Manitoba. And at the outset of his report, he actually said he did not realize how complex the Ottawa River watershed was when he started his work, because of this multi-jurisdictional reality. it does make it much more complex for us to work on issues such as endangered species, such as regulations and legislation that affect the health of the watershed. But I think you can click, Rita. I think that what makes Ottawa Riverkeeper's work strong is our connection to community-based monitoring and community members. So we, as I mentioned, look at the health of the watershed on various levels, not just ecological, although we are a science-based organization. So we look at, it is the source of drinking water for almost 2 million people. We're looking at endangered species. We're looking at the effects of development, shoreline development and industry, and trying to keep the watershed clean for future generations. So I think what these images show are all of those aspects that we work on, and also connection to the traditional unceded and surrendered territory, to acknowledge that the learnings that we can bring to our work from the traditional knowledge keepers. You can click and click again. So we do, I like to mention that, we talk about Water Day and the flow of water, and especially today on equinox, as we would have a water ceremony traditionally on this day, and it's really flowing out there today. There's lots of puddles, there's lots of water flowing, it's melting. And as our elders would tell us, well, there's actually, I think, 52 dams in the Ottawa River watershed, and that's like each one is like clogging your arteries, right? So it's preventing some flow. Yes, there's $1 million worth of energy produced on a daily basis from various of these hydroelectric generating dams, but really what it has done, it has changed. It's changed the health of our watershed. It's really been affected the health of our watershed. So we are, our most recent campaign is that we're working on the Carillon Dam, which is downstream from Ottawa, is going to have an investment of $750 million to fix that dam. And so we're trying to get in there from the outset to ensure that there is an eel ladder for the American eel to migrate up river, and it is an endangered species, I think, on one side of the river. So we're trying to work with Hydro-Quebec and the Quebec government to ensure that there's that they consider the eel when they're doing the retrofit of the Carillon Dam. So you can click, Rita. We work on various, I mentioned community-based monitoring, and that's really our focus at Ottawa Riverkeeper, is the projects we work on, and we are a non-for-profit. So I found it interesting sometimes being at gatherings where there's citizens who are unhappy with the issues that we're not working on, and saying we're not going far enough, and yet we are a non-for-profit. So we work on the issues that we get funding for sometimes, and that we search out funding for, and we search out partners for. Microplastics was one of those big issues that we have been working on and continue to work on. And we usually partner with universities and community-based organizations like FOG and ABVD7, which I'll talk about in a second as well. We identified 14 key indicators of watershed health, and so we've been collecting data on those in order to have a benchmark, and then start to look at how we can measure the health of the watershed. You can click. There is another, big threat in our watershed, which is nuclear waste pollution. There's been an opportunity recently to put forward recommendations on a change of nuclear waste policy. And so Ottawa Riverkeeper has been working with community-based organizations and experts to put forward recommendations to Natural Resources Canada, NRCan, on how the policy can be changed in order to deal with non-fuel nuclear waste, as well as other nuclear waste, which is present in the watershed. And we do see, as we all know, this sort of push on small modular nuclear reactors. And I think what we're trying to bring forward is that without a policy around what you do with nuclear waste, it's hard to then endorse more developing more small modular nuclear reactors or other locations along the watershed where these would be set up. So we're still working on that. There's an opportunity and we've got our foot in the door and we're pushing. So we'll be putting forward some recommendations actually next week that we will make that public, but also submitting that to NRCan. You can click. So I mentioned we are working on different endangered species that have only been affected by the dams and other industry pollution within the watershed. But as I mentioned, it's a tricky business when that dotted line that goes through the river and one side is Quebec and one side is Ontario. So you'll have species that are protected on one side, but not on the other side. So we recently worked on the hickory nut mussel, which was one of the endangered species on the Quebec side, not on the Ontario side. And we had to make sure that we were, doing our dives and on the right side. When you're under the water, we still had to try to make sure that we were on the right side. So it's interesting. We try to get partners together, different jurisdictions together in order to address these issues more holistically. You can click. I'm trying to keep it short. I just wanted to mention the Watershed Health Assessment and Monitoring. We call this our WHAM project. It's the acronym works in English anyhow, the WHAM project. And we work together with Algonquin nations as well as other experts to identify 14 key indicators within the watershed. And you can go to the website and see what those 14 are. The icons are here. I'm not going to go into them in detail. But they do include, algae blooms as well as the flow. So we're looking at different flow within the watershed, endangered species, et cetera. And we're, the effects of road salt is in there as well as one of the pieces that we're working with fog actually and others on the Tenagadino-Zibi as well as the Gatineau side and the Quebec side of the Ottawa River. And so these 14 indicators is we are collecting data, community-based monitoring data to really start to track the health of the watershed. And it is tricky in our watershed, as I mentioned, with all the various jurisdictions to have people share their information. You can click. But what we do want to show is that these indicators are all interrelated. So they're not separate indicators. They actually do affect one another. And that's why we look at that WHAM, the assessment monitoring tool holistically. You can click. So I just wanted to end with, despite COVID times, we're still trying to reach out to communities. We will be, doing shoreline cleanups that we'll be launching an app for shoreline cleanups where people can use an app and maybe go to their own shoreline cleanups, but upload information and share that information with a broader community of activists and advocates. We are doing water quality sampling with various organizations and individuals. We have a network of about 100 river watchers across the watershed, and we have youth water leaders. So we are really trying to build up that volunteer network overall for Ottawa Riverkeeper and for the watershed. Can click. Yes, I mentioned our river watcher network. So it's really about, doing those water quality tests. And I know that even the road salt monitoring that we have going on, just wrapping up now, our river watchers and our youth water leaders have been involved in that. So the eyes, we call it the eyes and ears of the watershed that help us gather data. And right now we're actually looking at ice on, ice off, because in various parts of the watershed, we're watching when the ice is actually, when the river's breaking up and actually monitoring that and chronicling that data. You can click. And that's it. Thank you. Miigwech. And you can go to our website and find out more. I just wanted to keep it very short today. I'm really happy and honored to be part of this panel today and share the screen floor with other speakers. Miigwech.
Okay. Miigwech, Elizabeth, thank you so much for that. And just thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing and all the amazing work that people at the Ottawa Riverkeeper are doing. It's just such important work, like defending and protecting local watersheds and just really inspiring and engaging community members, and like all the topics you're working on, like hydrojams, microplastics, road salt, nuke waste is just such current and pressing and relevant work. And I particularly am like in awe of the work that you do with youth, because I just think that's so incredibly important to bring young people into this work. So thank you, Miigwech, again. Okay, so the next speaker we have is Ilsa Torrensen. So Ilsa is a fellow La Pêche Coalition for a Green New Deal member. She's also part of the Wakefield Grannies and the La Pêche Global Forest Initiative. And I added this to her bio. So Ilsa is very humble and she only sent me this, but I just wanted to highlight the other work that she's doing in our community. So Ilsa is a grandmother, mother, sister, auntie, and friend, a special education teacher, poetry troubadour, community activist, deeply concerned and grateful human being on planet Earth. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ilsa.
The waters of Black River Pond have settled after a night of rain. I dip cupped hands. I drink for a long time. It tastes like leaves, stone, fire. It falls cold into my bones. Deep within me, I hear them whispering, what is that wonderful thing that just happened? It's a little poem by Mary
C'est un
Oliver.
poème de Mary Oliver.
Perhaps some of you have shared that sacred moment.
Peut-être il y en a parmi vous qui ont eu un souvenir de ce genre,
Given freely from the earth.
de l'eau qui est donnée par la terre. Pour moi, mon souvenir, c'était sur une randonnée.
Stone face, reaching out my hand, drinking the cold, cold water, plucking a little handful of watercress and feeling, oh, so alive. Well, as you tap into whatever memory you have about the sacredness of water, let us remember again the renewed understanding issuing from Indigenous knowledge, which is not just what we have to take from the earth, but what our responsibilities are. And as we drink every glass of water from here on in, let us use this International Water Day as a commitment to review and reinvest and recommit ourselves to our responsibilities toward water. I wouldn't feel comfortable dipping or drinking hand-dipped water from any of the water sources in the Gatineau Park or around here, but really here in Gatineau, really here in Wakefield, really here in Canada, do we have to worry about drinking water? I don't think so. I mean, there are 2.5 billion people on the planet who do not have access to drinking water, but surely that would never happen here. Well, ask the people in our community who live on Valley Verde and Browns Lake roads about that. One of the homeowners there purchased his land 50 years ago from a man, Thomas Main, who bought the area near the turn of the century. Now, Thomas Main was a hydrologist, and he was also, by the way, founder of Ducks Unlimited Canada, the organization which works for the protection and restoration of wetlands. Thomas Main conducted a study of the aquifers around our region, and felt that they have been proven to be amongst the best in Quebec in terms of flow and quality. And he felt so confident about these aquifers that he included in the deed of sale a guarantee that this landowner, who must remain anonymous because there are court cases pending around the waters in that area, that he would could be guaranteed clean well water in perpetuity. Well, along came the extension of Highway 5 and the use of an unauthorized explosive, which cumulatively resulted in perchlorate contamination of the wells of those households. Now, after the fact, the MTQ started testing the water and addressed the issue, spending thousands of dollars to bring bottled in plastic water to households and is installing filtration systems that were developed in the United States when it became clear that the water was being contaminated near munition dumps adjacent to military bases. So this is after the fact. These were pristine water. This was pristine source of water that has been destroyed. It may eventually clean itself, but the mitigation factors in addressing after the fact is not the same as applying the precautionary principle, and that is that to protect water when there's any fear of contamination. The residents on those two roads in La Pêche call out a warning to people along the highway extension, saying, hey, make sure there's a good solid geohydrological study in place and that the precautionary principle is applied. Around the same time as this happened, which is about a decade ago, I'm just using examples to talk about community responses to water threats and what it takes to protect water. SOS Wakefield was a group of people that gathered concerned about the impact of highway construction on the Wakefield Spring, which, according to the data that was collected by this citizen group, is used by over 5,000 people, 2,500 of whom, and it is probably a higher number now, use the water because perhaps their own water is not potable. So there is an issue pending regarding evaluating how many people in our region have potable water or are without it. Anyway, the Wakefield, the SOS Wakefield people spent hours and hours and days and hours and into the nights collaborating and advocating for a proper hydrological study to accompany the proposed highway extension. And finally, collaborating with the municipality, we're able, the MTQ agreed, the study was conducted, and it was decided that at that point anyway, that the construction might affect flow, but not the quality of the water. Now, our municipality continues to test the water at the Wakefield Spring, and so does the MTQ. And former SOS member Louis Malgat notices that the water is still being treated and drained at a spout up near the Goban rental real estate agency. So this business of water protection is not something that we can just relax and say everything's okay. It's an ongoing issue. Do we have enough information? Do we have all the information we need to fully understand the aquifers that feed the Wakefield Spring? In fact, all the water sources in our region. Drinking water protection requires ongoing hydrological research and mapping. Such studies are complex and involve a long time to come to conclusions in order to ensure that developments are regulated properly and monitored. As Philippe Capelier, also a former SOS member, points out, we need to pay heed to how vulnerable water is in this period of global climate disturbance. And here science coincides with advice from this particular elder, and that is we have to slow down in order to understand what's really going on with water, and then engage in integrative planning, and then act fast and all together to protect this, yes, renewable, but finite resource that is critical to life on planet Earth. If one looks at the legislation in place, the Water Act, Quebec's Water Action Plan, the environmental assessments legislation, the Sustainable Development Act, the regulations regarding public consultation, which call for independent environmental impact studies that would include any major projects that could possibly affect water and other and habitats. One could almost say, well, we don't have anything to worry about. But citizen groups all over Canada will say that there is incredible economic pressure to encourage development projects at the expense of water and habitat protection. Both Louis Malgat and Philippe Capelier, water warriors for sure, urge us to take this into consideration. If we are told that water protection is everybody's responsibility, we may assume that someone else will look after it. But no, if you recognize a problem or a need not being met, it's time for all of us to step up and contribute to a solution. And by all of us, I mean the municipality, the MRC, all the organizations, all of us as people, not making demands necessarily, but sharing observations, engaging in the citizen science that Elizabeth spoke about, understanding that habitat protection is equal to whatever rights we think we have as human beings to use natural habitats and water in a careless way. The US and Canada have the highest per capita personal use of water in the world. So along with this on World Water Day, perhaps we might want to take a consideration about how we use water. The UN suggests that a 5-minute shower should do the trick, and that you want to be careful of anything you put down the drain or into the toilet. All of that is filtered back into our water. We are called upon to nurture a new awareness of what it means to drink water and to use water on planet Earth. As I said, the laws seem to think that, say that citizen consultation is a high priority, et cetera, but there's a lot of obstacles. Talk to the residents in Ward 6 in Chelsea. In a recent letter, Barb Shaw spoke about citizens concerned about the health of the pond in the wake, in terms of what will happen when the Chemin de la Rivière is repaired, which needs to happen, of course, or maybe it needs to happen. And the municipality has not responded in the spirit of collaboration. Maps were difficult to get. Citizens, I think, are sometimes, citizen concern is sometimes viewed as a nuisance. And that group is still continuing. It may well be that the pond that they're worried about is not big enough to be considered a wetland, which is protected by Quebec law. But I wonder if part of what we're experiencing now in the wake of climate crisis and a new awareness of how threatened our waters and habitats are, that we may say that maybe preserving a pond is equally important to to repairing a road, and utmost caution needs to be applied in any situation that affects water and the possible habitat of creatures such as the ones Elizabeth described. Another group in the area that's been working hard is the Lac Gauvreau Lake Association, and the which is working hard to remediate milfoil invasion. By the way, there's going to be a screen of all resources, and the Lac Gauvreau Secure Citizens Group has an excellent website about milfoil invasion. They have engaged in a information education campaign, which included door-to-door deep canvassing, in which I participated. And one of the things that came up for me when I was talking to people about milfoil and about their use of the lake and about how people feel about their use of the lake was that to say to someone, you can't use your boat, really imposes a sacrifice upon that person. I was listening to a piece on Unreserved on CBC radio the other day, and it described a project going on in BC where a fishing village was engaged in a salmon restoration project, which was asking people in the area to limit their recreational use of the river. And a sacrifice. They asked people to sacrifice something that is really dear to them in order to preserve something that's even dearer, which is the health of our water. ABV de Set, which is an NGO whose mandate is integrated water management and creating a water master plan for the region, has created Michelle Labelle, who's a biologist, was seconded by our municipality of La Pêche to create a tool by which to evaluate water environmental priorities. And I suggest that these 7 recommendations should be taken to heart. To consistently enforce our bylaws and zoning laws regarding no building within 5 meters of the high water mark on any shoreline. To revitalize, restore shoreline vegetation, creating a buffer zone which protects water. To continue developing ecologically sensitive water runoff management. To protect wetlands, which, by the way, according to recent studies, are disappearing 3 times faster than forests. To educate, sensitize, and train municipal officials, inspectors, councilors, and the public about water and water ecosystem issues. To ensure that we have good drinking water, publicly owned, publicly, openly public, part of the commons forever. The La Pêche Coalition for a Green New Deal would recommend that these tools, this guide should be incorporated into policy and even as a resolution, where you have an uncompromising commitment to the protection of water, regardless of what the seeming economic benefit of a project may be. And so I invite us all to step up as water protectors, to work together in the spirit of collaboration, not necessarily making demands, but being open to work together with municipal urban planning committees and environmental committees to come up with solutions and to step up as the Ottawa Riverkeeper has shown us that there is a role for everyone in protecting our water and making sure it's available for our children and for in perpetuity. Maybe we can still make that bill of sale valid. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ilsa. Thank you for sharing that beautiful poem in the beginning and bringing stories of local residents and their water and how it's been impacted, but also the amazing work that local residents and groups are doing. There's just like, I feel so grateful to live in a community where people care so much about water and are doing so much, and just really agree that like water is so sacred and precious, and we really need to be applying the utmost caution to it. So I really thank you for sharing all of that. And for folks in the audience, if you have any questions for Ilse or Elizabeth, as mentioned, you can type them in the Q&A, which is just at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll answer them after. But for now, I want to introduce Maude Barlow, who is a Canadian activist and author, and she chairs the board of Washington-based Food and Water Watch and Ottawa-based Blue Planet Project. Maude co-founded the Council of Canadians and chaired its board for over 3 decades. In 2008-2009, she served as senior advisor on water to the 63rd President of the United Nations General Assembly and was a leader in the campaign to have water recognized as a human right by the UN. And this is not part of Maude's bio, but I always like to introduce her and remember that Stephen Harper called her a wanton and officious intermeddler. And I just always like to say that. Maude's been such a leader on water and an inspiration to so many people. So please join me in welcoming Maude.
Well, thank you, Emma, very much. And I'd forgotten that lovely quote from our Prime Minister. I was very proud of that. I actually had a button made of it. Thank you to you and Rita for the work you've done putting this together. Big shout out to Elizabeth for caring for our beautiful river system here, to Ilsa for those passionate words. I remember joining you for part of that campaign, the SOS campaign. And of course, we were right. And just want to say that on the in this group here is Rebecca Petrin, who is with Eau Secours in Quebec, who's doing fabulous work on blue communities there. So Rebecca is here as well to finish about what's happening. So I'm just going to start off with just reminding us, and Ilsa mentioned this briefly, but I want to remind us that we are living in a planet running out of clean, fresh, available water. We have polluted and diverted and dammed and mismanaged and over-extracted water. And if you look at this, the charts, the demand is going straight up and the supply is going straight down. And as a result, we have many parts of the world in pretty serious crisis now and certainly in the future. And then when COVID comes along and places a spotlight on the need to have good sanitation, and the first thing we all learned about this time last year was, well, wash your hands with warm soap and water. It's very, very important. Do it all the time. And we find out that over half the population of the entire world doesn't have a place to wash their hands with warm water and soap. That's just an absolutely astounding statistic. There are so many schools and even health clinics and certainly homes where people in many, many countries of the world, many countries and communities don't have a place to do that. And frankly, if anything good might come out of COVID, it has been that has been so stark that aid agencies and wealthier countries giving aid money for COVID are targeting it to more permanent sanitation services. So I can't imagine something good coming out of this, but if we don't learn from an experience like this, then it was truly as bad as we experienced it. In Canada, we are more blessed. We are blessed, as Ilsa said, and as Elizabeth said, we have more water per capita than most places in the world, but it is not true that we have 20% of the world's water. We have about 6.5% of the available accessible water. That's the water you can use without destroying or drawing down the main source of water. We do not have adequate laws. We have not mapped our groundwater. We have laws for human sewage, but no laws for sewage and runoff coming from factory farms, which is more and more the way we produce our food now, and these large industrial, chemical-laden, hog and beef factory farms. And when that runoff, that nutrient runoff, runs into our lakes and rivers, it can destroy them. Certainly, Lake Winnipeg is a prime example, very much because of hog farming, where the blue green algae is blooming worse and worse every year. So we allow chemicals into our food production that then ends up in our water that should not be there, that's banned in other places. We have very poor laws for mining and extractive industries and fracking in terms of protecting our water. So we have in Canada what I call the myth of abundance. And that is this notion that we have so much, it doesn't matter where we dump our pollution or how much we move from where nature put it to where we want it. We see water in the global north, particularly in the more industrialized countries, as a resource for our pleasure, profit, and convenience. And this has got to stop. It's exactly what Ilsa was talking about. Now, one of the issues that we've been dealing with, and I'll come to Blue communities in a moment, is that knowing that this shortage, this water crisis is upon us, the private sector knew before most of us that anyone who could control and own water would be both powerful and wealthy. In a planet running out of the thing you need for life every single day, those who control it are going to be very powerful. And so we've seen a continuum of ways in which water has been privatized and commodified. Started basically back in 1987 with Margaret Thatcher privatizing Great Britain's water services. Then the World Bank saying, well, we're going to promote public-private partnerships or full private water concessions. If we give funding to countries in need of funding for water services, they're only going to get that money if they bring in a private company. And in many cases, the World Bank brought that company and signed the agreement, and the country it's nothing to do with you. This is between the wealthy countries and the companies themselves. The good news on that is that we're winning that fight. There are now 313 municipalities, many of them major municipalities, that tried privatization around the world that have gone back to public ownership and public control. So this is it's very important that we know that we can fight this. But there are many other ways, of course, in which we privatize water, bottled water. The people around the world buy 1 million bottles of plastic water every single minute. And if we were to put them end to end, what we use in 1 year, end to end, they would reach halfway to the sun. I mean, it's just obscene, our relationship to water coming through plastic, especially when in the vast majority of our cities, and I know not in First Nations, but in most towns and cities in Canada, we can turn the tap on and get clean, safe water. So we've been fighting Nestle, we've been fighting other bottled water companies, but then along comes Nestle and says, we're going to divest ourselves of the North American operations, and we're going to sell it to equity investors or big private equity companies. Oh, it's hard enough to fight Nestle, right? But at least you can identify Nestle. But how do you identify the faceless investors that are coming in to take over water? There's water trading. We have some in Alberta, lots in the US West and Australia. They privatized, basically not just privatized, they converted the licenses that farmers had to water and then said, now it's a water right and you can sell it. And the idea was, well, they would conserve because they can sell what they save. But of course, the big agribusiness came in and bought the little companies or farms up. And then the big investors like Macquarie Bank, and then the big international investors, and the price of water just went through the roof. And then when the government tried to buy water back for the Murray-Darling, because there was such a crisis and such a drought, they couldn't afford to buy it. And we have water pollution trading, which has started in the US, where it's like offsets for energy, or emissions offsets, where you can buy your way to continue to emit emissions. Here you can buy or trade your way into being allowed to continue to pollute a water system. And the most recent is the announcement in the US that they've created a water futures derivatives market. And this is different than the stock market, where you're actually bidding on actual water or water companies. This is where you're bidding on the asset of waters, and you're betting on drought, you're betting on crisis. So you're going to buy a huge amount of water in, say, California, knowing this drought is going to get worse, but you buy it at this level, knowing that you are hoping that you can then sell it at a much higher level. And this worries me, I think, more than just about any form of privatization, because you can imagine if people get in individually or in small groups. I mean, the big companies, obviously, the big investors, but think about people selling water shares, water assets like Bitcoin. We need government regulation on this. Martin Luther King said, legislation may not change the heart, but it will restrain the heartless, which I think is a wonderful thing he said, one of many. So we started Blue Communities in Canada 11 years ago. 11 years ago this fall, it was the Council of Canadians and the Canadian Canadian Union of Public Employees held a big conference. Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. He was promoting public-private partnerships on municipalities that wanted to increase their infrastructures. You know, maybe they were growing, or maybe the pipes were 100 years old and they needed money and they needed investment in infrastructure. And he basically said, if you want federal funding, you have to move to a private model. And so we decided, and we were fighting bottled water, and we were fighting then for water as a human right. It still was not recognized. It was recognized a year later at the United Nations General Assembly, water and sanitation both, but at that point, no. So instead of being against everything, we're against, you know, bottled water, against privatization, we decided to be for something, to have a vision that we wanted to think about becoming aware, becoming municipalities taking a stand. And we started in Canada, and it was just municipalities at the time. And as Emma said at the beginning, the three pledges were to promote and protect water as a human right, promote and protect it as a public trust, so no water privatization. We were trying to get there before Harper and his government got there, and that they would phase out bottled water on municipal premises and at municipal events like conferences and conventions and so on. And we've done really well. We have, I think, I stand to be corrected, but I think we have 39 municipalities in Canada, many of them in Quebec. Thank you to Rebecca and Au Secours, who've done a fabulous job. But then it started to spread. I was in Bern, Switzerland, about 6 years ago now, fighting Nestle, because that's where their headquarters is. And I met the then mayor of Bern, and I told him about Blue Communities. He said, I love it. Would you come back here and have a celebration if we become a Blue Community? So the city of Bern, plus the University of Bern, plus the Reformed Church of Switzerland, all became Blue Communities. They've actually got a full-time Blue Communities coordinator in Switzerland. It started to move through Europe because they were fighting water privatizations. Paris is a Blue Community. Berlin had privatized its water. It was a terrible experiment. The people rose up, they had a huge referendum, they won, they had to buy back their water because the contract had to be broken. And they decided never again, we want to be a Blue Community so that this, you know, we have it on the books that this doesn't happen again. Brussels, Thessaloniki, and we just have a number of cities. And then back here in Canada, more recently, Montreal and Vancouver have become Blue Communities. And I'm very excited to say that Los Angeles has become the first major American city to become a Blue Community. And when you think, well, these are cities that, don't they have clean water coming out of their taps? Well, yeah, but in Los Angeles, they have 1 million people in the Los Angeles area that don't have access to water and sanitation. So it's not like everybody, you know, drives around in their BMWs with their condos and everything. The problems of water and water inequality are here in the global north. One of the things I loved about what they did in Europe was they added a fourth. Most of the cities, most of the municipalities said, we want to promote public partnerships in our relationship with the global south, because a number of these cities partner with a city in the global south to help them with water services. And they said, you know, we want to promote public service. We want to send our experts there to help set up good public systems. We don't want our government anymore to be promoting public-private partnerships in the global south. So it's beginning to turn the balance in Europe, where Europe has said, well, we want public services, but those people there, they need our companies because they don't know how to do things. And I've actually talked to people who put it in that kind of language. So it's an ongoing struggle. It then moved to universities. McGill is a blue community. I am honored to be the Chancellor of Brescia University and connected to Western in London, Ontario, and they're about to become a blue community tomorrow, which I'm very excited about. The World Council of Churches became a blue community, and that is something like 500 million people around the world that belong to that denomination of churches, and they're all promoting the concept not only of water and protection of the human right, but the protection of water itself, the protection of Mother Earth. And we're making this connection between caring for Mother Earth, caring for water, understanding that water is sacred, and we have to stop seeing it as this resource for us, as this product, this commodity that we can put on the open market like oil and gas. And we have to really start understanding, as Ilsa says, that we have to think 7 generations ahead. So I'm on this World Water Day tomorrow. I'm actually feeling hopeful. The United Nations, as I said, did adopt the resolution recognizing that water and sanitation are fundamental human rights. We now have over 4 dozen countries around the world that have either amended their constitution to recognize the human right to water or brought in a separate law. We have a number of court cases, important court cases, where the human rights resolution was used as part of the decision to ensure or give back water to people. In the United States, where they've been cutting off water cutoffs of 15 million people a year because they can't pay for water because the price of water is going up so much. For COVID, there was a campaign led by Food and Water Watch that said to states and municipalities, you can't do this. People need to be able to wash their hands. And there's really been a remarkable change in the thinking. And they used this resolution as one of the core arguments that one of the obligations on government is that not only are you required to produce the system for water and sanitation, but you can't remove it from somebody who already has it. And also the third obligation for governments is they have to protect those water sources from pollution. So we need to start using this human right that we won. It was hard. Canada led the fight against it. I was mortified when I did my work at the UN. But we can do this. And as I said earlier, if anything's good's going to come out of the crisis that we've all gone through, it is the knowledge that the private sector, not just in water, but in everything, has failed us. They failed the global supply chains. They have not been the answer. Even the International Monetary Fund, that is so pro-market and so pro-economic globalization, put out a statement about a month ago saying the private sector has failed the world, and governments have to come back. Good government, responsible government, social services, investing in people, investing in health, investing in water services. This is crucial. So I'll just end by saying that although this is my most recent book that's been published, I've just finished the first draft of my most recent book called The Little Book of Hope, Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. And I want to end with a note of hope, because writing a book on hope all through the winter months of COVID was a strange thing to do, I'll tell you. And I'm on all these listservs, like we all are, about this problem and excuse me, climate change and the 6th grade extinction and all the stuff we all hear, the threat to the oceans and so on. And yet I came out of that process actually feeling hopeful, because I am sensing a sea change in the culture of people around the world, from leaders to grassroots communities I'm just sensing it. And one of the things I wrote about in the book was my years in the women's movement and the changes that have happened to women in the last 100 years. And that is a sea change in culture, in the way we perceive something. It doesn't mean everything's fine for women today. I'm not saying that at all. But it's profoundly different than it was 100 years ago. It's profoundly different than it was 50 years ago. It's quite different than it was 25 years ago. And we can change. And I talk about this map, this political map of movements, and how they often just give up just before they're about to win. You know, you're getting up, you're climbing up that hill and there's boulders coming down because the bad guys know you're getting there, right? And too often we give up, but we shouldn't give up because we're in sight of it. And when you get to that place, then you have to turn your attention to the culture, the culture of the majority, and we have to change hearts and minds. And I think we're in the age of nature. I think people are understanding that yes, we have to fight greenhouse gas emissions, but nature-based solutions, restoration of watersheds, restoration of forests and wetlands and soil, which will all be, will all be carbon sinks. Among the other many wonderful things they do. These are all really, really important. And I have watched how, even at the UN, the change in the language and the thinking. So I want to end with a note of hope, because I think hope is a moral imperative, and that we get up in the morning and dust ourselves off and go back to work, because, well, there it is, that challenges us. That's the work that we were given to do, lucky enough to be given to do in our lifetime. So thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, thank you so much, Maude. It was a really important overview of the global water crisis, and important to highlight the myth of abundance. And it's super concerning about bidding on water and water futures and trading water. And we're really seeing like a deepening trend of water commodification and privatization. So I'm really happy that we're talking about the Blue Communities Project, because it's a very strong movement that is really fighting privatization around the world. And I just think that's so important, and also appreciate you leaving us with a feeling of hope, because I think we really need that right now. So thank you. So we'll start with the Q&A portion. So if you have any questions for our wonderful speakers today, Maude, Elizabeth, Ilsa, as well as Rebecca, who's with us from Eau based in Quebec. If you put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, we'll read them out and we'll have the speakers respond.
So there is one question at the moment from Christopher Laforge. Short of changing the world banking and investment system, is there hope for improving the water crisis? I'm presuming that's for Maude.
Well, I think we have to change all of the systems. I mean, again, I'm just thinking the arc of my book. When economic globalization was introduced in a serious ways, started to be very important in certain circles in the 1970s, but in the 1980s, it really took off. And everybody was told, all boats will rise with this. All boats, the big ships and the big yachts and the little fishing boat, everybody's going to be doing better. And the essence of economic globalization, as well as, you know, the banks are a big part of this, was that governments should do the minimum that they can possibly do, you know, social services and taking care of, you know, policing or whatever, but get out of the way in terms of all the decisions around finance, trade, and the market. In fact, give to the market all those decisions. And so deregulation, privatization of social services, letting the corporations set their own environmental and labor standards and let them take their production wherever they want to go, and you know, no matter what the conditions like that over there, it's going to be cheaper goods back here, so don't look, right? And free trade. And my former organization, the Council of Canadians, came together to fight free trade, the first Canada-US Free Trade Agreement back in 1985. And by the way, that's where I got into water. I was reading the annex at the end that listed all the goods, everything, you know, cars and running shoes and wheat. And there was water in all its forms, including ice and snow. And I can remember thinking, no, how can water be a tradable good? I don't understand. And that's what set me on this journey, right? So everything was to be included in this notion of handing it over to the market. And free trade was one of the most important vehicles, because the essence of free trade is free. It's free from, it's not free as in nice things fall from the sky. It's free as in free from government interference, government regulations, what they call protectionism, what we would call labor, environmental, resource protection. You know, this is, the more of these trade agreements there are, the fewer rights individual people have. Well, now we know. How's it going for you all this time later? The World Bank admits that 3/4 of the world's working age population is in what they call the precariat, don't have full-time jobs or security or pensions, or, you know, I was at a conference once during one of the Bush years, and somebody said, well, George Bush has created tons of jobs. I personally have 3 of them, right? Of course, he was being facetious, but I mean, that's the system that they wanted, and that's the system that they got. So in answer to your question, I think we profoundly have to go back and change the power of the banks, the power of the market, the power of the corporations. Of the world's 100 largest economies, 69 are corporations, you know, only 31 are countries. So Walmart and Amazon and ExxonMobil, they're bigger than most countries. Their annual revenues are bigger than the GDP of even large countries. And when they tell governments, this is what we want you to do, governments listen. Well, not after COVID. After COVID, even conservative right-wing governments like Doug Ford is saying, never again will we be without the ability to provide personal protective equipment for our people, medical supplies. You know, the federal government, you know, the Mulroney government privatized Connaught Labs back in 1987. And that was a world-class public laboratory that gave us wonderful, wonderful biosciences, not private. It was owned by the Canadian people. They helped develop the diphtheria vaccine for smallpox, worked on the Salk vaccine. They were really wonderful. He privatized them, and then he allowed them to be sold to a big French transnational. So along comes COVID, and we don't have the ability in this country to produce our own vaccines. That's not going to happen again. Now, I don't want to go back to narrow nationalism where we only care about ourselves and we don't care about you. This is the moment to say, what kind of trade do we want? What kind of international agreements do we want? How do we want our governments to regulate our banks so that they are not allowing the uncontrolled amount of financialization of the economy, which is, again, like with water, you're not bidding on something real. You're not bidding on goods and services. You're bidding on scarcity. You're bidding on, you know, you're gambling. You're bidding on, you want to make money from assets that aren't real. And I think all of this is going to come under deep scrutiny because I may be wrong, and I hope I'm not, but I think something has changed. And when even a Doug Ford of this world says, never again will we be subject to the whims of the global economy like that, I think we're ready for a dialogue that we've needed for a long, long time.
Thanks, Maude. That was a great answer. There's another question here from Nadia Alexin. She's wondering if you have any examples of failures of privatization in Europe that allow the municipalities to return to the public system.
Well, I sure don't want to hog this, but I know that subject quite well. Yes, Nadia, hello, how are you? It's nice to, I don't see you, but you see me. I know Nadia well. Yes, Paris, all of the cities in France were run by private companies. The 2 big ones now are Veolia and Suez. One's buying the other. They're merging, which is not a good thing. But anyway, they ran the systems in France for years, but then they were mostly sort of French companies, and they would make some money, but they were private for-profit companies, but they weren't transnational. But they went transnational in the 1980s when they were starting to then work with the World Bank to grow and to go into the global South, into South America and Africa and so on. And then, of course, what happens is with the same amount of public money that the public sector would have, you have to find 15 to 20% profit, overhead profit for your investors, right? So the experiment went downhill really fast in France, and France became the municipalities there became the first to say no. Grenoble said no, and then it just started like a rock rolling down the hill. Just the end of privatization. Paris, when Paris ended their private water contract, which is now about 11 years ago, within a year, everybody was noting the increase in clean water, in the quality of water, but the water rates went dramatically down because there was no investor, there's no profit in the system. Berlin is a really important example that I go into in my book, because Berlin was going to be the leader in Germany in showing how privatization is more efficient. And it was just an absolutely outrageous story. Why in Great Britain, in London, do they still have private water companies is beyond me. Thames Water is an outrage. It's a criminal. Every year they dump their pollution in the Thames River. The prices are outrageous. They went up right away when Margaret Thatcher privatized back in the 1980s. They don't pay taxes every year. Like every year people complain and complain and complain. And no, because they have had one conservative government after another, they're locked into the mindset of privatization, but it's just an outrage. But yes, 313 municipalities, many of them major, since the year 2000, that tried privatization said that was a mistake and have gone back to public management. So there are many, many good examples and lots of places to have you go look to see those outlined.
Next question is from Ted. I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name properly, but Ted is asking, do you think the current federal government is buying into the argument that we need to do things differently as we emerge from COVID-19?
Would others like to take this? Rebecca, Elizabeth, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, I can start and anyone can jump in. This conversation has had, made me think as well about the Canada Water Agency that's been getting propped up within Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I think it started with a small vision and hopefully got expanded through our the last 12 to 13 months experience. And that I was part of a group of NGOs that organized what was called Nature on the Hill, sort of trying to push for a more nature-centered budget coming up soon and where those investments could go. And for the Canada Water Agency, it was interesting. I made the point that, Ottawa is surrounded by water, that we are a surrounded by water town, and the MP that we were talking to kind of went, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. We talk a lot about our coastal oceans with the Canada Water Agency, but we haven't talked enough about fresh water. And I was like, wow. But, and that's sort of that was in February or March, but, it just made me think, there's an opportunity, but I'm not sure how far this government's ready to go yet. But I think the voices have gotten stronger and stronger, even we've seen some of the infrastructure money going to some creative projects that weren't just the usual infrastructure type of projects that you would see. There's some recognition, I think, that there's a need to look at things differently. So again, I think I'm pulling off the hope that you've brought into our conversation, Maude, trying not to be too cynical, and that, there's enough voices pushing for, the change that we're seeing within our work environment, our lives at different socioeconomic realities. And so hopefully that is heard by the federal government. But I'll just start with that if anyone else on the panel wanted to speak to it.
Well, I'll just add, I mean, I think it's so important, and hi, Ted. I think it's so important to continue to push the government And I'll just like highlight a couple of folks mentioned this, but the drinking water advisories in First Nations, like the Auditor General just came out with a report. Trudeau had committed to ending the drinking water advisories by the end of this month, and that's not going to happen. And like they focus a lot on like long-term drinking water advisories, but like they've put this category of like short-term drinking water advisories, and that does also include First Nations that have been under water advisory for a long time. So they're playing around with the numbers, and they have for a few years. And so I guess related to your question, like I do think like pushing on all levels is really important. It's not where I think that the change we need, like that we want to see, is going to happen immediately. I think it's going to happen in local communities, and so I think the community work that people are doing is just so very important. I think the federal government would like to see things go back to normal, and that means like the commodification, privatization of water. And so I don't know that yeah, that I think that's where the real change is going to happen, but I still think it's so important for us to continue to hold them accountable, and then to do the work in our communities, because I really think that that is where the hope lies for me anyway.
And I'd just like to agree with both of you and say that, not to be soft on this government, I'm hard on them all, but they really inherited a system that was so broken. I mean, I did a report, Emma will remember this, on the Harper years just before the 2016 election, and I broke it down into 6 areas where there had been the decimation of, you know, women's programs for people with disabilities, education. I mean, you just go through it. It was just absolute environment, the forests and so on. I did a whole section on water, and it was just awful what they did. I mean, they just cut all the water programs. They cut the funding for local communities. They cut the funding for major projects for which we were known around the world. I mean, and they decimated scientists. I mean, that's one of the problems that happened again when COVID came along, is that Harper took money that was funding science in Canada and shifted it over to energy research. The scientists were just decimated. I mean, a lot of them left. I don't know if you know, but they used to have minders. If a Canadian scientist went to a conference in another country, they would send a minder with them to some guy in the PMO who go with them just to be sure they didn't talk and didn't say anything that might be embarrassing to Canada. It really, I don't think people understand how decimated the environment and the environmental legislation was when this government inherited it. So my inclination is to say, do better, but not to put it in the same category as the government we had before. And look at the Conservative, and I'm not being partisan here at all, but look at what the Conservative Convention just did. They didn't recognize that climate change exists. So we really are at a point where we have to say, we have to have government that believes in this. We absolutely have to. So the government we have to push, and then hope for better government always. But I feel more hope than I would have had we still had that former government, I guess.
Thank you all. That gives a good tour of our perspectives. I know we're kind of running out of time, but there is one question here for Rebecca. I'll say it in English and then I can say it in French after. Perhaps Rebecca can get, this is from Yolande Henry. Perhaps Rebecca can give us an idea of potential of rural blue communities, smaller communities as part of the just transition in Quebec or even nationally.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je vais vous parler en français, donc je crois que vous avez la traduction simultanée en anglais. Peut-être je vais prendre quelques minutes pour présenter au Québec. Au Québec, on a plusieurs grosses villes qui sont devenues communautés bleues, mais c'est vrai qu'il y a de plus en plus de petites municipalités qui s'intéressent à ça, au projet communauté bleue. On a des bénévoles, on a une dizaine de bénévoles qui sont mobilisés un peu partout sur le territoire, qui démarchent en fait des conseils municipaux pour faire la promotion du projet Communauté Bleue. Et comme quoi c'est important en fait d'adhérer en fait au mouvement pour protéger contre d'éventuels assauts en fait de la privatisation qui pourrait avoir lieu. Donc, au Québec, la privatisation des services d'eau, ce n'est pas une menace qui est aussi grande que d'autres parties du monde, en fait, dont en France ou même aux États-Unis. Sauf que la façon qu'on aborde la question, c'est que c'est une protection supplémentaire pour les menaces qui peuvent venir en fait dans le futur. Donc, c'est bien qu'en ce moment, pendant qu'on n'a pas cette menace-là, de protéger les communautés pour le futur. Je crois que c'est une excellente initiative pour la transition écologique future parce que, et de un, ça fait impliquer les citoyens dans un processus. Donc, les citoyens qui n'avaient pas l'habitude de se mobiliser auprès de leurs conseils municipaux. On a des jeunes aussi qui se mobilisent, donc ça leur permet en fait de s'intéresser déjà à la politique municipale et puis à prendre conscience en fait du pouvoir qu'ils ont en tant que citoyens dans une municipalité. Donc, c'est un premier réveil, c'est vraiment important. Et puis, est-ce qu'on a une traduction simultanée?
So, no, we don't have a
sorry.
panel. Yeah. So I've been writing down notes and trying to, I was thinking of like translating after, but I'm not sure. No.
Okay, sorry about it. Maybe I can try in English. So please, I'm not so comfortable in English, but I can try to explain you. So it will be a training for me. So yeah, more and more in the time, we have more small community in Quebec who are interested by Blue Community Project. And I explain it's a very good thing for us because we have voluntary person who get involved in this project and they are citizens. They are young. We have very young person, like 15 years old, who get interested in this project. And this is very interesting because they start to know about the municipal counseling and how it works in the political in the municipality. So they get involved early and they know how it works. So it's the first step, I think, in the ecological like to get involved in the small community about all the subject. So I think it's a very, very nice way. And in Quebec, the thing, because I saw about the pollution, the water, about the industry, and if there's heavy fines, the company that, well, we have we have a big problem in Quebec. It's with the wastewater management. They drop in the river. Fondation Rivière published a map earlier in fall, and they show us how it's exhausting. All the wastewater they drop in the river all around Quebec. And the first thing we're supposed to do in Quebec is ask at the municipality to to get tarification for the water they use in commercial and industrial sector. So they need to pay for the real price of the water they use. And the real price, the water they use is the treatment for the drinking water and the wastewater management. Actually in Quebec, for 1,000 liter water, the industrial and commercial sector pay about maybe $1 per 1,000 liter. And it costs maybe $3.5 for the municipality to treat that. So the difference price, it's the citizen who paid this. So it's why in Quebec we have so used and not efficient installation for treatment water. So the first thing, we will be in municipal election in the next fall. So it will be the message in Osaka we will push. It should be a good idea to ask the good price of the industrial and commercial sector to pay for the citizen services. So this is the first thing. And well, I will just stop here because it's 5:30. But we have on our website on Osaka, we have page just for a blue community in Quebec. So if you're interested to have more information, please just write us. So communautébleu@osaco.org and we will send you more information. Okay, thank you.
Okay, merci, Rebecca. And I just want to thank all of our speakers, so Maude, Elizabeth, Rebecca, and Ilsa, for their inspiring and informative presentations and for the great answers to the questions. And I want to thank Rita for being the tech support and fielding the questions and getting us all together. And then Miriam, who's been doing simultaneous translation the whole time. Like, that's a very tremendous job. So just want to say thank you for that. And all the coalition members who helped with this event. We have such a vibrant group, and it's always such a pleasure to work with all the members, and everybody did so much to make this event happen. So I just want to thank everybody for that. And thanks to all the audience members who stayed until the end for your smart questions. And I hope that you stay in touch with us. Oh, I just want to mention Maude's book. So for those who are in Ottawa or the Wakefield area, you can get it from Octopus Books. They'll have it there, or if you're somewhere else, you can buy it at your local bookstore. And again, today's event is part of the La Pêche Coalition for Green New Deal's education series. And so we had included the PayPal link. So if you can make a donation for supporting this event and any other upcoming events, and you can follow us on Facebook or like us on Facebook. You can get in touch with us at lapeshegnd@gmail.com to join our mailing list for upcoming events like this. So thank you so much, everybody, and happy World Water Day, and continue doing all the amazing work that you're doing to protect water. Thanks, everyone.
Miigwech, the Zoom